Hey everybody, this is Heidi Bushbeck from St. Paul, Minnesota, and you are listening to Charlotte Mason in the City. It is a podcast that discusses how we bring Charlotte Mason's living principles to the people of this city, both young and old, and also how our family and others that I connect with practice Charlotte Mason in the city. So we hope you enjoy our podcast. Well, hello there. This is Heidi Bushbeck, and you are watching Charlotte Mason in the City. And today I have a great friend here that I'm going to be interviewing, Andrea Happel. Did I say that right?
Andrea Happel. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, that's great. And I want, well, I should say, we know each other from many, many years ago. We go to a couple of different retreats together, and I think we probably met in 2009.
Yes.
At a homeschool retreat called LER. And I think I shared when I did my interview with Amber O'Neill Johnston, that's where we met too. So that's a good meeting place for Charlotte Mason moms. But we
Agreed.
also attend a fall retreat together in Iowa and have been doing that for 10 years? And that's been really a big blessing for both of us, I think. And
That's
the
called,
funny
go ahead.
Go ahead, you can share what it's called.
That's called the Weekend of Living Ideas, and that's a very homey retreat, very relaxed.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that, well, the reason that I wanted Andrea to share is this year she's teaching my daughter Spanish online. And of course, I've known for years that she did Spanish things and she's done workshops at that retreat. However, I'm always doing music workshops at the same time. So I've never been able to sit in on her workshop. Therefore, I didn't know she offered online classes. And so by happenstance, I saw her advertise her class at the beginning of the school year, and I said, "Oh, you have classes?" So my daughter's loving it, and she's 12. And so that maybe is a good segue into I would love to hear how you've used Charlotte Mason in your community or in your sphere, and maybe just tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we can delve in more to that.
So when I went to that LER, Living Education Retreat with Nancy Kelly in 2009, that was, as far as I knew, just scratching the surface of my experience with Charlotte Mason. I had heard about Charlotte Mason at a state conference with Sonia Schaefer.
Hmm.
But when I went to LER, it was full blown immersion and narration. And only later did I figure out that my mother had read the books by Susan Schaefer McCulley for the children's sake. And so I'm one of the few people of my generation that I know who was homeschooled for a period of time. And my mom was very open to Charlotte Mason's ideas, but I never heard the name Charlotte Mason. I never
Hmm.
knew what was going on. Well, all the time we were going on nature walks and drawing pictures, like it was there, but I didn't know that it was Charlotte Mason. So when I came into that 2009 retreat, I really felt like I was coming home to a home that I didn't, it was like meeting a great aunt that I never knew I had. And so that whole conference was about narration with Dr. Carol Smith. And at that time, that's what I knew of Charlotte Mason. So I took that home and ran with it. And I already was a certified Spanish teacher at that time. I had been trained to teach Spanish K-12, and the method that I had fallen in love with in my schooling was called TPRS books, now known as teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. And in that approach, we use narration we don't necessarily call it narration, but it is exactly that. We're telling and retelling. So again, coming home to Charlotte Mason, I found a place and a community of people already doing everything that I had been brought up to do, that I had been trained to do.
Well, that's exciting. Um, so as you've learned more as a homeschool mom about Charlotte Mason, I'm curious, how have you personally learned to live a more full life because of Mason? So expand kind of beyond Spanish a little bit, maybe, and just share. Because, and the reason that I ask this is because my hope is that people will find these ideas life-giving and that
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't necessarily have to be that we ex um, investigate these topics just because we homeschool our kids, but maybe we're helping like a single mom who
Mm-hmm.
might benefit from beautiful art, for example, or nature, or some of the things that you said you felt like you were coming home, or so just the joy that we've had and
Mm-hmm.
how that could help other people in loving learning and having good ideas. So just share some ways that you feel like you've lived a more full life because of these principles and ideas of Charlotte Mason.
Yes, thanks for that question. I had been, so as my husband said at one of our Weekend of Living Ideas Dad's panel, he said before we found Charlotte Mason as a homeschooling family, we practiced the EFM. And he said, does anybody know what EFM is? And he said, it's the eclectic floundering method. And I really was feeling like I needed a direction. My kids were young. I am very eclectic and chaotic at times. And so I was looking for something to grasp onto. And as you know, when you homeschool, there's a lot you have to unlearn. I come from an education background. I went to school to be a teacher, and I came into the homeschooling world and I found that what I needed for my kids and what my kids needed from me was different than what I was served up in our education system. Now, that's not to say it's all bad. Um, but coming back to Charlotte Mason, it's like I had to unlearn some of those lesson plan things. I had to relax and just be with my kids and learn how to do that and be and have it be well with me.
Hmm.
And like I had been looking at another curriculum that was highly involved, highly um, prescribed, and I was attracted to it right at the time when I found Charlotte Mason at that 2009 experience. And I'm so glad I didn't go the other direction because Charlotte Mason really gives us so much freedom as teaching parents. It's it is about the books and what you do, and it's also about how you build that relationship, how you create your home atmosphere, and how you because it's a lifestyle, an atmosphere, an education, a life, and the science of relationships. And building your relationship with your children, your student children, is the the ultimate goal of that kind of education and helping them to build relationships with others in past and present. That's the real goal. It's not to read a bunch of books, even though we read a bunch of books. It's not to see a bunch of pictures, even though we see a bunch of pictures. But it's rather to form relationships with nature, with other people, with authors, both living and passed away. So that's what it gave me the space to breathe as a teacher and a parent. And it gave my children a chance to breathe as well.
Hmm. Are there things about Mason that you have learned as you've taught your kids that have brought you as a mom person life?
This idea the that I'm not in charge of everything, that I have a role to introduce my children, but I don't have to decide in advance for them what they're going to get out of a certain activity or lesson. Like, it's my job to bring the lesson or spread the feast, as we say. But it's not my job to predetermine how they're going to receive it. That has brought me a lot of life, and that's one thing I had to unlearn as a teacher. And that has opened the door to delight. My students can receive what we are talking about in their own ways and take away what they want, and I don't have to be in control of it. And I think that speaks to the art of masterly inactivity.
Mhm.
It's the perfect it's the perfect way to let go of being a control freak.
Yeah. Well, there's this lot of people follow, oh dear, I'm a homeschool mom and I don't know these things. Her name is escaping me, but she's wrote a new book called The Let Them Theory. And I've been listening
Oh
to
yeah,
it and
Mel Robbins. Is
yeah,
it Mel
thanks.
Robbins?
Yep. And I've been trying to filter her ideas through scripture and through what I believe about educating kids in Mason. And I think that a lot of what she describes in her podcast and in her book, I haven't read the book, but I've listened to a couple talks. There is a biblical framework or foundation to that, which is ultimately we're limited human beings and we have to accept our limits. We're finite and we can't control other people, no matter how much we want. Um, and that can apply in our marriages, in our churches, in our parenting, in our homeschooling. But I think, especially when we educate children, releasing that control and realizing that the Holy Spirit is really in control. It's like if somebody wants to take this out of it, then let them. Or if they judge you and you're hurt by that, but you need to move on, you let them because we can't control others' actions. And there is so much life-giving when we surrender to the Holy Spirit and to the work that He's doing in people's lives and just offer what we can.
And trust that whatever they took from that experience is what they needed at that
Mhm.
time. And that repetition is also okay because we could come back to that book or that piece of art, and we, as well as they, our children, might get a different thing that time. And that's okay too.
So, um, tell us a little bit more about what you do specifically with Spanish or however you want to share, and how do you share that and engage in the community?
So the Spanish started out for me in a trip after high school. I got to go on a medical mission trip to Guatemala, which changed the course of my life. That's the short form of the story. I did not know that I was going to be a Spanish major. There's a whole bunch of things I didn't know at the time, but at the time that I took that trip, it touched off a series of events which led me to study Spanish in college, which led to a study abroad trip, which led to teaching. And then when I was homeschooling, I was not actively, continuously teaching Spanish. We did some things sometimes. Um, but as I started developing this idea of having my own business, I started developing having a Spanish online membership. And that was like the 1.0 version. That's what was in the works back in 2012. And fast forward to today, what I now have is an online Spanish academy, which I call Spanish with Andrea, and currently serving 23 students in 6 different states. And I've also had students like join us from Mexico. I also have my colleague that I met way back when I was in Ecuador almost 30 years ago. He joins us for certain days. And so students get the benefit of having a native speaker with us. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, you did. I'm just thinking about how have you seen that grow over the last few years? Because do you want to describe some of the levels that you have in case people would be interested in it?
Sure. So I started reopening up classes probably around 2019, 2020. Started experimenting with it. And at first, it was a lot of prep work, a lot to get ready. But when 2020 came around, I reconnected with the people at TPRS Books and found that they have a great curriculum. So I was also simultaneously working at a small private school, which is a wonderful place. That's Summit Schools in Cedar Rapids. And so I was kind of all in Spanish all the time. I just immersed myself in relearning a new way of teaching it that had echoes from the past. Um, and then, so everything that I was doing was helping both my in-person students and my online students, and it really worked very well. The how the online classes started, it was just a couple of classes. I had an elementary level and I had a Spanish 1. And then the Spanish 1 turned into Spanish 2, and the Spanish 2 is now Spanish 3 and 4. So it's grown from just a handful. I think I had 8 students total the first year. So now in year 5, I have um like I said 23, one of whom is my own son, which is a joy as well. Um and we move through a series of stories and we read through different novels that are specifically designed for Spanish language learners. And really, the students start speaking from day one. It's amazing. Even though I'm following a recipe for language teaching, it's not how I learned Spanish, and it's not how I learned to teach Spanish until recently when this was revamped. Um, but it's like a recipe that works every time.
Hmm.
It's tried and true, and it's delicious every time. I get so excited when the students start speaking from day one.
Well, and we'll say that we're actually doing a mom's class right now too, and I'm in that, and we're recording it hopefully for other people. But my daughter's loving the beginner level this year, and I think participating and watching her, what I've observed is we're hearing the language, then we're reproducing the language, which is in some ways a form of narration, but then we're reading stories and we're hearing you read, or we're practicing reading, and then we're saying what we heard in Spanish, and we're also trying to narrate what we heard in English. And, just little sentences, little words, little bits here and there, but it's just slowly building that vocabulary. And then we're practicing basically retelling or restating what we had just done in the lesson. And so we're forced to talk. So it's immersive, but it's I like that there's a lesson where we learn some vocab and some rules about grammar, and then there's a part of it where we're reading and we're retelling a
Mhm.
little story that's has pictures, so it helps us. Um, but anyway, I maybe this transitions well to, I mean, do you want to just share a little bit more about language learning in a Charlotte Mason method, or why learning languages would be important? And then even, one of the things that we were chatting about earlier this week is just that Mason talks a lot about learning languages to know other people's cultures and to understand other people and to try to be able to relate to other people. And I think even in the inner city context, for me, it was a fun touching point when I was teaching some Hispanic students that I was trying to teach Spanish in a Charlotte Mason environment, and they were in my classroom, so they would tease me about it. But yet, yesterday in the car with one of my students, I was showing him what I had learned and trying to practice with him, and he was teasing me. And then he was trying to sing songs in Spanish and translate them for me into English while we were listening to the song in Spanish. So, like, it is when you begin to learn someone else's language, it honors them. And they're like, oh, you see
Absolutely.
me. You
Yes.
see me. You want to know
Yeah.
me at this deeper level. Like, this is my heritage and my culture. So we can go, like, this is maybe the why of why we want to learn languages, but we can also talk about the method you use and how it, to me, it's always good to put Mason's ideas into her philosophy and why, and then her methods, because that's what she did. She had her
Mhm.
principles, and then she has extensive methods. And there's a way to have a life-giving teaching method that supports the reasons she had. So, do you want to
I love that. I
tell,
love that
tell us a little
question.
bit?
So I want to go back to a word that you used, which was force. And
Mhm.
I like to think of it as I invite the students to speak. Um, I believe in a kind of a low force, well, in a really low force, invitational way of learning. And I use that in the classes. Yes, I want students to speak when they feel equipped. And with the support we have in our slides, our curriculum, they do feel that support and they feel confident enough to speak right away. And you've seen that too in our class, right, Heidi?
Yep.
um, so going back to another part of your question is like some of my students in the Spanish with Andrea have used their Spanish in the community. Um, One story I love is where one of the students translated allergy concerns for her family at a restaurant. The people cooking the food, it was like a Mongolian grill type place. They spoke Spanish, and so she used what she knew to tell them what they could and couldn't eat. That was after year one. um, Another student worked at a restaurant, and she was able to talk to her Spanish speaking colleagues, and she just dove in and did it. She didn't get too worried. She said she was nervous about it to the person, but she did it anyway, and the person really appreciated it. And it's those connections that drive me. Those I can share my enthusiasm for the experiences that I've had and the doors that speaking another language has opened for me. I can talk about it all day long. What I really get excited about is when the students come back and tell me the connections they have made. And then I think that's the reason we're doing this. Charlotte Mason talked about France being a close neighbor and honoring them by learning to speak some French. We have a Spanish speaking country as our closest neighbor, one of our closest neighbors, and we can honor them and the people that have lived in the US for generations that speak Spanish also. It's woven into our country's story. I get excited about the history of Spanish in the US also. And I'm not going to go into detail because I could go off on that, but we
Maybe,
have, we
maybe
could
we
do
can
that
that's
another
a
time.
second interview.
Right. But there are people that have generationally lived in the United States for 5 generations. They speak Spanish. They're not immigrants. This is where they've been longer generationally than some of the Europeans. So just knowing that and teaching students about place names and the history of our country as like a very rich tapestry from the very beginning. It's exciting, and it's exciting when it sparks curiosity about other countries that speak Spanish. The story of Spanish is a story of colonial activity. Spanish went around colonizing a lot of different places. They were up to the tip of Alaska, all the way down to the southern tip of Chile, long before the Pilgrims set foot at Plymouth Rock. They were all, I'm not saying everything they were doing was great or recommended for today's world. However, that is why we have such a rich Spanish heritage today and such a variety of Spanish speaking countries. There's even Equatorial Guinea as an African country that I would like to learn more about that has Spanish as their official language.
Hmm. Wow, that's interesting. Um, so that I think is a good picture of for sure why we should learn languages and maybe even consider Spanish as a language in addition to or instead of French, like Charlotte Mason, because of our nearby neighbor. So that's been a consideration for our family, and that's why we've chosen Spanish, along with the fact that I studied it in high school. So I
It
feel more
makes it
comfortable.
easier, right?
Yeah.
That
Um,
said, we're seeing a lot of African immigrants coming into the US today, and many of them speak French as either a first or second language. So French is I learned French on Duolingo. Like after I'm done teaching and doing all my work in Spanish, I'm on Duolingo learning French. And it has come in handy. I've been able to speak to African immigrants in my community using French.
well, and that's a good thought with regard to like the city ministry. Our church is working on planting a church and close to the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, and we have a large Somalian
Mhm.
refugee population and immigrants in our cities. And so just thinking about being salt and light in our neighborhood and bringing hope and just maybe good education for children in general, private education that's affordable. It's something that I've been chatting about with my pastor, but that's a really good thought with French because I don't know about Somalian people if they have any French background, but we do have a wide variety of immigrants in the cities. And so when you're in a city, having multiple languages that you can access is a great touch point for just relating to other people.
And if you ever meet somebody that speaks another language, um, they love to teach you just a few words, and their eyes light up whenever you say it, whenever you greet them. If you know how to say hello, they get so excited that you're even trying, that you're making the effort. It's a very simple way to make somebody feel welcome.
Right. So do you want to tell us a little bit more for moms maybe who are listening and homeschooling and don't know very much about Charlotte Mason's thoughts on language learning or just some ways that things that you do or things that Mason talked about with language that could be helpful or other things that you want to share about Spanish?
Sure. So one thing I wanted to say when we were talking about other immigrants, like from Somalia, and not knowing their language per se. Um, Anytime you start learning another language, number one, you learn more about your own language. It's like suddenly it opens up your mind to say, oh, well, why do we say this way versus that way? It's like we're we're automatically reevaluating what we know about ourselves. So I believe in that way, learning another language increases self-awareness through that gateway. And then number two, when we start learning a second language, that's the hardest. The second language is the hardest. Your mother tongue is easy. You acquire that naturally through what linguists say is hardwired. We're hardwired for language learning. Everybody produces some language, even if they can't hear or speak. It comes out somehow, whether in gestures or expressions. Um, the the second language is the hardest to learn unless you are exposed to it naturally from a very young age. However, the third language is easier. The fourth language is even easier because once you understand there's a system going on here, then you can start to apply what you've picked up in that second language and apply it to the third. So we, uh, um, as language teachers, we're actually like creating connections in our brains when we learn another language. We are strengthening that information superhighway in our brains. We're making more flexible. Uh, I don't even. There's a whole line of brain research in language learning, and I don't have all the words for it. But um, we, if we study another language, we have more flexibility in how we think, how we see perspectives, and how we talk to other people. So that's just scratching the surface.
how how would this how would learning another language or doing Charlotte Mason in this way where we engage immersively and can speak more quickly and can narrate um, with the goal of knowing our neighbor or honoring our neighbor. I'm just curious ways you think we could inspire our listener to think about how to be outward facing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think a lot of homeschool families can tend to be a little isolated
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. Sometimes we act like we're running away from the public school or we're afraid of things in culture or um, we feel like, well, we should focus on our family first. And those things might be important. But I also think that our call to be loving and kind neighbors means that we also face outward and that we go into our community with joy and hope and peace and love. And
Mm-hmm.
so the way I personally do that is I have faith in Christ and I'm a Christian and
Mm-hmm.
I feel commanded to share what I believe. But then I also think Charlotte Mason's principles uphold that by having these rich, beautiful ideas and honoring the personhood of the child and that sort of thing. And so I want to encourage families who value this to then be
Mm-hmm.
outward facing into their communities, bringing this to other people. And so you can speak broadly to Charlotte Mason and your faith, or you can also be more specific to maybe language learning, even and how, like, if I'm thinking about helping kids in the city, why would, if I wanted to start my inner city Charlotte Mason school this fall, why would I teach a language to inner city kids when maybe they need to just focus on the basics because they've been in a school where they weren't learning to read or something? Those are some things to
Those are
explore.
some really, that's a wide smorgasbord of ideas to draw from. So we're living in interesting times. I don't think we've ever had so many different cultures interfacing together at once. And that can be there's parts of that that can be frustrating. There's also amazing, beautiful, wonderful parts of that. And those parts are what I like to focus on in
Mhm.
my language learning, language teaching, and people learning. Um, every person, every culture is like a whole different world experience. Um, I think about when I brought my kids down to a summer Bible school program we were doing with migrant workers not far from here. And everybody played together. They played soccer. We sang songs together. We played with Play Doh together and colored together and told stories together. And that was something that I was invested in because I was speaking Spanish with the people there. I also greatly valued the opportunity for my kids to get outside of what we do at home and see how other people live. And we ended up making connections with families, ended up being invited into their apartment for lunch after one of the days there. There's so much richness that we can experience when we open up just a little bit to the people around us. And um how there's so many different experiences that I could share that are like that. We one thing my son and I do in the car is listen to Spanish radio, and just the way that they talk and laugh together on Spanish radio has opened up his eyes to, he says, this is how they experience their life together.
Mhm.
And then we both laughed about, and then they come to the US and everything is very different. So it, there's a lot of opportunity to avoid others, yes, and to just stay in your comfort zone groups. And then if we're open to it, there's so much richness to be discovered when we realize like, hey, that person next to me, they're craving connection, and just saying hello and talking to them can be good for both of us.
And in my experience, a couple weeks ago, I was picking up pizza for a friend, and there was a gentleman in there working, maybe for DoorDash or something. But I said hello, and he said he couldn't speak English very much. And so immediately then I knew he spoke Spanish. So I thought, well, I better try and be brave. So I did. And he just was like, oh, you're speaking my language. And I invited him to church, and he got my number, and he was interested in coming. But he just immigrated here from, I think, Venezuela like 5 months ago. And I don't think he even has friends yet. He's new, and he just seemed so happy that I was trying to talk to him. And I think that that is one of the beautiful things about both being a Christian that loves people and wants them to have joy and a full life, but also doing Charlotte Mason has made me so much more aware of just all the different joys and duties and interests of life that we have, and that um, by trying to learn Spanish and knowing about the history and the culture of our country and some of the things you shared, it just makes us more interested. It's made me more interested in wanting to continue to learn as an adult, and therefore to know my neighbors, to understand where they've come from. Um, and it's just a loving way to exist. And I think like that's what I hope to bring if I start a school or like a ministry of some sort to moms and kids. Like I want to bring that connective the connectivity and the hope and the joy of like I can honor you as my neighbor even if you're different from me, and I can learn from
Yeah.
you, and we can learn together, and maybe they'll never accept my faith, And I can't control that. Like we talked about earlier, we can't control people, but we bring this beauty and this richness and an interest in other people, and that honors them. And then that makes our whole community a better place.
There's plenty of richness to go around in that rich cultural experience.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts, ideas, or things that you'd like to share, either about Charlotte Mason or Spanish or the things you do, ways that these things could benefit others?
Well, if people want to see more about what I do,
Yes, please tell
my
us.
SpanishWithAndrea.com, all spelled out, is a great place to start, and which means I better go update it right now. Um, I typically work with high school students who are homeschooling students, starting in the fall, going from September to May. We finish before Memorial Day, we start before Labor Day, and the students get a number of hours per week. It's it is a speaking focused program. We actually use the language to build relationships and tell stories instead of what often happens is Spanish or other languages are taught to where students learn about the language rather than use the language. I've only met one person over the past 30 years when I say I'm a Spanish teacher who has said, "Oh, I actually speak Spanish. I learned it in high school and I speak it today." Most people will tell the opposite story. I studied Spanish
Mhm.
in high school, but I cannot speak it. Well, this program, this recipe that we use in Spanish with Andrea is the opposite of that. We're learning it, we're speaking it from day one, and it's so exciting to see how we develop and the way that we use it for communication. It's beyond words. It's not just about learning a set of words to substitute out for what we're already thinking. It's about learning that, hey, it's possible to think in different ways and
Yeah.
experiencing that there's a gateway and we can start to see the world a little differently.
Well, let me show you. I have this right here. I didn't keep it here on purpose. I just saw it out of the corner of my eye. So this is a journal I had out. And so look, I wrote all of this in, for people who are just listening, it's a notebook and it's a page and a half of my written narration from my Spanish class with Andrea on Wednesday night that we're doing for with some moms. And
And that's
I
from
have not
lesson number 2, right?
lesson two, and I took 4 years in high school.
Mhm.
That's it. And I am 44 years old, so I've been out of high school a long time. And I have not used it very much other than periodically trying to teach my kids. And I've been just starting to review on Duolingo at Christmas to help my daughter. So I wrote all those sentences because we did the lesson, we practiced speaking, we read it, we told what we had read, then we read a story, and then she had us write down what we had done, and we read it for each other, and we heard the same sentences from one another multiple times. So it was like gelling in my brain. And then I felt confident enough to practice with my student in the car yesterday. So
That's
it was just,
amazing. And I love how
yay!
much you were able to write. I mean, that was 4 minutes of writing,
I know.
and it just was flowing for you.
And
And
I
yeah.
here's the story too. In college, I took an entrance exam and I was able to skip to a 300 level Spanish class
Mhm.
because I knew so much grammar from high school, like you were just speaking about. And then I got into the class and it was completely immersive. I was supposed to write a 2-page paper the first day. I was supposed to just listen and understand everything. And I couldn't because even though I knew the Spanish grammar and I could read it and pass that test, I couldn't, and I was so overwhelmed I quit the class. Now I shouldn't have. I should have kept on, but I was scared to death because I couldn't speak. And I thought, well, this is for people who can already speak Spanish. So the fact that here we are 25 years later and
It's
yeah.
reactivating what was lying dormant before. And then because, oh, this is the other part of this recipe, is that we focus on a very small number of words.
Mm,
This is one of the things that blows my mind is there are thousands and thousands of words in a language, but how many of them do we actually use every day? So, as it turns out, we just need what we call base structures. We only need about
mm,
50 of them to speak over half of the Spanish language, or English for that matter. But why learn 2 or 3,000 words? Why cram our minds full of things we don't need when what we really need is to be able to use the things we have? That's
mhm.
like the decluttering podcast. But no, this is how we approach the language. We take the bare essentials and learn those really well first and build confidence in those first. And then we gradually add on. It's a little bit repetitious at first, but that repetition gives us confidence to go forward and gradually add more words. I just had an image of like mixing up chocolate chip cookies. It's like you can keep putting more chocolate chips in when you already have that batter.
Well, and when you think about like children and babies, we do that with our babies. We ball, get the
It's
ball, get the
simplified.
ball, get the
Yes.
cup, get the cup, and let's look at the, and we're looking at stories, and they're very simple children's stories when they're 6 months old and a year old, but we're saying, mommy has a teddy bear, daddy has a teddy bear, daddy has the ball, get the plate, all these different things. And so we say the same sorts of short sentences with our babies too. And, I think that that actually is a benefit, all the other brain benefits of learning language, but also just, I think that would strengthen inner city kids too, children who've maybe come from homes where learning hasn't been as vibrant in their young childhood. Just having another way to learn things and to almost relearn a language, um, just I think would make some connections for them linguistically that would probably help them be better readers and writers in English as well. So,
The other thing too is that if you're in a context where there's like multiple cultures, then you might have a few young people who are speaking Spanish at home. And then that time where we're in Spanish, that's their chance to shine. That's where they know what to do, how to speak, and where they can become the teachers of others in a perfect, in an ideal world. They
well,
can
and
become the teachers.
in a small micro school, I think that would be possible because when I was at the farm, about half of my students were Spanish speaking, and I
Mm-hmm.
utilized them to help me teach, and it was fantastic. And,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't get to do perfect lessons because we had other behavioral issues we were working through and that sort of thing.
We
But it,
have to let go of that ideal of perfection as
yeah.
teachers, as moms. We have
But
to let that go.
instead, it was like, wow, this is what you're so good at. I really need your
Mm-hmm.
help. And I think that that
Yes.
honors the child.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if they're struggling with other areas of school, like whatever they are good at, like bringing that forward and allowing that to shine for them.
And it brings us into a sense of equality as learners. We're learning alongside each other rather than the traditional top down. I teach you,
Mhm.
you learn.
Yeah.
It's like, let's approach this together and learn this together and build this together. It's a very different energy when we're open to that as teachers and learners.
Mhm. And Mason, I think, really emphasizes that that idea into two different things she talks about regularly. One is humility.
Mm.
And as we study, like as I study the humility of Christ and laying down his life for us, like that is
Mm.
how our posture should be as teachers to children. But then she uses the phrase, the teacher should be the guide, philosopher, and friend,
Mm. I
and
love
I
the
just,
guide, philosopher, and friend.
it's so beautiful
Yeah.
because then we're coming alongside and we're guiding them in the ways that we are wise ahead of them.
Hmm.
And a philosopher, I think, just means, especially with my teenagers now, it's like, well, I wonder about that. Tell me more. And why do you think that?
Mm.
And helping them develop the ability to think carefully and love learning and just being their friend, whether they're 3 years old or 18 years old, and
Or
like being a
23.
co-learner. Yes. Is your oldest?
Right.
How old's your oldest?
23.
Mine just turned 21 last week. So we're getting old, Andrea.
And
Especially,
and I've committed to never losing my sense of wonder.
yes. Well, that's what Mason has given both of us, I think, as moms, is like don't lose touch of that because our kids, my daughter was 5 when I went to the first LER that year.
Mm.
So your son must have been 7, 7 or 8.
2000. I'm not mathing right now, but he was
That's
born.
okay.
My first one was born in 2001, so he's 8.
Yeah, yeah. And she was 2004. So um just really to think that we've known each other that long and that our kids are adults now. And that for me, it has been such a beautiful journey of learning myself. And like you said, to just have this beautiful sense of wonder in whatever we're studying, whether it's Spanish or the Bible or a flower or math, even
Or
though we can't math
history,
anymore.
or right, and to have a curiosity and a desire to know more about the people and the world around us.
Mhm. And we should want to give that to other people, I think. So
It
I'm,
flows naturally.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because learning is so exciting to us, then we want to talk about it. And then other people are like, oh, how do you know about chickens? How do you
Or
know?
other crazy random things that we tend to pick up, right?
Yeah. Well, this was wonderful. We probably should wrap up and we
Thank you
can
so
have fun
much.
too. We should do a history of Spanish in the United States. That would be really interesting. So thank you so
That's
much for
for
coming.
next time. Yes, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
And we will talk again soon.
Bye for now.
As we wrap up this episode today, I want to share with you an opportunity that you have to learn more about Charlotte Mason music. About 8 years ago, I developed a music website called Miss Mason's Music, and it has lessons and memberships available for parents to learn how to educate their children using Charlotte Mason's methods in regard to music education. We have some information about instrumental music there. We have some lessons and some resources for composer study. We have lessons also for folk dance and folk singing. And my specialty is in solfa or solfege, and that is what I studied in college. I studied vocal music education. And so if you go to missmasonsmusic.com, you can learn more about the music curriculum that I developed. And we have videos there with lessons so that you and your children can watch me and my children do singing lessons, and we're going to be updating the website and adding new teenage videos. So I hope you join us there, and you can get a lifetime membership right now for $25. So it's a steal. So run on over to missmasonsmusic.com today and check it out. Thanks.